Welcome to the Midnight Narrator, where the mind's deepest corners reveal chilling truths. Tonight's story, Recalibration, takes us into the heart of a flawed justice system and the terrifying consequences of reform. A cousin, once filled with love and loyalty, emerges from prison, but something is wrong. A new procedure promises to reshape the future, but at what cost? Can science truly fix what's broken in the human soul? Get ready, because the truth behind this rehabilitation will leave you questioning the very fabric of what it means to be human. My cousin Finn had spent the last 8 years in a secure correctional facility. It seemed a life sentence loomed until he called with news of a novel rehabilitation initiative. He was offered immediate release on probation if he agreed to participate. A new procedure, a behavioral recalibration designed to prevent recidivism. I now bitterly regret that he accepted. Growing up, Finn was my protector. My aunt had a difficult early life. She became pregnant with Finn at 16 and was estranged from her family. She moved in with Finn's father, barely 20 himself, who resided in a cramped apartment in a neglected part of the city. He was abusive, forcing her to quit school and take on multiple jobs while he indulged in gambling and reckless behavior, often resorting to physical violence. She feared raising a child alone and tried to maintain the relationship. However, as her pregnancy became more apparent, Finn's father abandoned her. Facing homelessness, she misrepresented her age to secure a small, rundown apartment from a landlord who prioritized rent over background checks. When Finn was born, she struggled to provide. Barely 17 and without a proper education, she worked constantly, leaving Finn in the care of a compassionate elderly neighbor, Mrs. Elmsworth, who lived in the adjacent apartment. When Mrs. Elmsworth passed away when Finn was 5, my aunt was forced to leave him unsupervised while she worked, often staying out late. She turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms, finding solace in fleeting relationships with unreliable men, many of whom left lasting emotional scars on both her and Finn. Growing up in this environment of neglect, poverty, and sporadic violence, Finn was a troubled youth. He frequently clashed with other students, engaged in petty theft, and generally caused disturbances in the neighborhood, until I arrived. One of my aunt's short-lived relationships resulted in her second pregnancy, another boy, myself. I was born shortly after Finn's 11th birthday. Realizing his mother wouldn't change overnight, he assumed the role of my primary caregiver. He changed my diapers, did the grocery shopping, prepared my meals, bathed me, and cleaned the apartment. He did everything he could to create a better childhood for me than the one he'd endured. It became his mission to be the father neither of us had. At school, he ran a small informal trading operation from his locker, exchanging snacks, collectibles, and later in high school, restricted items for extra money to buy me clothes and toys. At 16, he took a job at a local salvage yard, working after school to help with rent and bills. I never understood how he managed it all. Around this time, I started school. He packed my lunches and ensured I caught the bus each morning. With his additional income, my aunt was able to reduce her work hours and be home when I returned from school. Whether it was something Finn said or simply the observation of his efforts, my aunt began to address her issues and made a greater effort to be a mother to me. It was too late to fully repair her relationship with Finn, but my time with her became less fraught. After graduating, Finn worked full-time at the salvage yard, earning a decent wage. He could have pursued higher education, moved away, and built a different life, but it wasn't even a consideration. He was determined to save enough money to move us to a safer neighborhood and fund my future education. He worked tirelessly, and my aunt increased her hours as well. They both contributed to a future fund, and I experienced a relatively normal childhood while we anticipated our escape from our dilapidated apartment. We had little, but we had each other. Then when I was 13, disaster struck. Finn was arrested. He was always looking for ways to earn extra money, and his boss, Mr. Corbin, occasionally offered him off-the-books assignments. These usually involved transporting items or delivering messages. Finn never questioned the contents or the purpose, focusing solely on the compensation. One evening, Mr. Corbin gave him a different task. Finn was to drive an associate to a remote location, wait for him, and then drive him back. The details were vague, but the pay was double his usual rate, so he agreed. The first part of the evening proceeded without incident. Finn picked up Mr. Corbin's associate and followed his directions. They exchanged few words. After about an hour, the man instructed Finn to extinguish the headlights and pull into the long driveway of an isolated farmhouse. The man instructed Finn to remain in the vehicle with the engine running, exiting the car, and disappearing into the darkness. Finn felt uneasy. He considered leaving, but the money was crucial to our plans. He waited, telling himself the man was likely retrieving something or conducting some private business. Then through the open windows, Finn heard a series of sharp reports. Gunshots. He panicked, turning on the headlights and attempting a hasty three-point turn. He was about to accelerate when the passenger door was yanked open. The man scrambled inside, yelling, "Drive, get us out of here!" Finn obeyed, speeding away as the man clutched his side, his hands covered in blood. "I've been hit," he gasped, his voice weakening. He slumped against the window. Finn tried to rouse him, but he was unresponsive. He located the nearest hospital on his phone and drove there frantically. He pulled up to the emergency entrance and alerted the staff that his passenger had been shot. Medical personnel rushed the man inside, while questioning Finn about his identity and the circumstances of the injury. Finn, in a state of shock, struggled to formulate a coherent explanation. He couldn't invent a believable story on the spot, and simply stated that he didn't know the man, asking if he could leave. He was detained by hospital security and informed he would have to speak with the police. While waiting, he considered contacting Mr. Corbin, but he was unable to find a private moment. He tried to devise a plausible alibi. His efforts were futile. He was arrested immediately upon the arrival of the police. The farmhouse belonged to a local sheriff investigating Mr. Corbin's illegal operations. Finn had unknowingly driven the man to an ambush that had gone tragically wrong. The sheriff, alerted by the approaching vehicle, was armed and prepared. The intruder had forced his way into the house and a shootout ensued. The sheriff was fatally wounded, as was his wife. The intruder, also injured, fled the scene. The sheriff's wife managed to call for help before succumbing to her injuries. The police were alerted to look out for gunshot victims at local hospitals. When they connected Finn to the incident, he confessed everything. The intruder died from his wounds. Finn tried to explain his ignorance of the man's intentions, but the police were unmoved. Mr. Corbin, of course, had an alibi, and no evidence could directly link him to hiring the man. Worse, Mr. Corbin attempted to frame Finn, claiming he had expressed frustration with the sheriff ES investigation, and that Finn had taken it upon himself to resolve the issue. The evidence placed Finn at the scene, and despite the lack of forensic evidence tying him directly to the shooting, he was charged as an accessory to murder. The court, seeking justice for the slain law enforcement officer and his wife, handed down a harsh sentence: 25 years to life. We exhausted our savings on his defense despite his protests. No matter how we argued his lack of knowledge, we couldn't prove it. He was sent to a distant correctional facility, leaving us with barely a chance to say goodbye. For the next 8 years, I visited him whenever possible, and he called when allowed. My aunt and I were left financially devastated. Our dreams of a better future were shattered. She relapsed into her old habits, and I struggled to keep us afloat, working multiple jobs to pay the bills. Despite her flaws, she was my mother, and I couldn't abandon her. My and Finn's dreams of my attending college vanished. Yet, Finn remained remarkably optimistic. Throughout the years of hardship, the trial, and his time in prison, he maintained a positive outlook. He always insisted that better times were ahead and encouraged me in every conversation. But I knew he was suffering. He desperately wanted to be free to help us, and his living conditions were appalling. He tried to hide it, but he looked gaunt and often bore the marks of altercations. The meager food made him ill, and he mentioned having to sleep on the floor when there were no available beds. My cousin had only wanted to earn extra money to improve our lives, and now he was paying a terrible price, possibly for the rest of his life. Then, a few months ago, he called, sounding more excited than I'd heard him in years. He'd been selected as a potential candidate for a new early release program. He had 17 years left before parole eligibility, but if he participated, he would be released immediately. It was a new procedure, involving a behavioral recalibration. It sounds too good to be true, I said. What's the catch? They said I'd have to undergo an experimental procedure. They called it cognitive restructuring. Cutting-edge science, they said. It supposedly eliminates antisocial tendencies and guarantees I'll never commit another crime. But the great thing is, I don't really have any antisocial tendencies, so it shouldn't change me. He spoke rapidly, barely giving me a chance to interject. I was apprehensive. I don't like the idea of you being a guinea pig, Finn. What do they mean by cognitive restructuring? It sounds invasive. Is it surgery? Yeah, I know it sounds a little strange, but it's just a term they use to make it sound palatable. They said no surgery, no drugs. They won't disclose the exact process, top secret stuff, but they assured me it's not physically invasive. My guess is they'll strap me to a chair, put a helmet on me, and zap my brain with some kind of waves to make me docile. He was remarkably nonchalant about the prospect of having his brain potentially altered. That sounds incredibly risky, Finn. If they won't tell you what they're doing, what if it goes wrong? What if it hurts you? My concern grew with every word. It won't hurt me. They guaranteed that. They said it would change me, but they're talking about removing antisocial tendencies. And you know I'm not really a hardened criminal. Look, this is our chance, Liam. 10 minutes. That's how long they said the procedure takes. 10 minutes and I'm back with you and Aunt. 10 minutes and we can rebuild our lives. I can get a job, we can save money again, you'll go to college, just like we planned. Aunt might even pull herself together. His last statement made me realize he wasn't seeking my opinion. You've already agreed, haven't you? I asked. He paused. I love you, cousin. The line went dead. I didn't hear from him for a week. He usually called every few days. When I had a day off, I drove to the correctional facility, but they wouldn't let me see him. He was supposedly in the infirmary with an illness. I mentioned the early release program and asked if his illness was related. They said he simply had a flu. They also claimed to have no knowledge of any early release program. I left a message for him to call as soon as he felt better. A knot forming in my stomach. Something was wrong. In all the years he'd been inside, Finn and I had never gone this long without contact. He'd been ill before, but he always called to let me know he might be out of touch. And why deny the existence of the program? Were they lying? Had something gone wrong and they were covering it up? Or was it truly so confidential that not all staff members were aware? I could only wait. Another week passed without a call. I returned to the facility receiving the same story. He was still ill, no visitors allowed. I became more insistent, demanding to see him in the infirmary. They refused, threatening to bar me from future visits if I didn't leave. I reluctantly complied. After 3 weeks of silence, I was convinced something terrible had happened. I bombarded the facility with calls demanding information about Finn and the program. They eventually blocked my number. I was on the verge of contacting government officials when my phone rang. It wasn't Finn. It was someone from the facility, informing me that we could pick him up the next day. He was being released on parole. That was it. I tried to ask questions, but they cut me off, simply stating, "He'll be available at noon," before hanging up. I was stunned. 3 weeks of silence, and now, he was being released. I would have my cousin back, but my excitement was tempered with dread. What state would he be in? They had imprisoned him for his involvement in a violent crime. What had they done to him to convince them he was no longer a threat? I only had to wait until the next day to understand. Finn had been right about one thing. My aunt was different at the prospect of his return. She only had a fraction of her usual morning drink and actually ironed her clothes. We even had a brief, coherent conversation about how things would be better now. But when we saw him, it was clear this wasn't the homecoming we'd envisioned. Finn was changed. The warmth that usually radiated from him was gone. His face was blank, his eyes distant. He stared ahead as if he didn't recognize his surroundings. When I called his name, he turned, but it seemed he responded to the sound, not to my voice. I hugged him, telling him how happy I was to see him, that he was free. He didn't reciprocate. His arms remained stiff at his sides. Finn had always been affectionate, especially with me. I expected a strong embrace, but received nothing. I pulled back, filled with worry. Finn, what's wrong? What did they do to you? I gently shook him. I feel functional, he responded mechanically, his voice devoid of emotion, like a synthesized voice. Before I could demand an explanation from the guards escorting him, a slender woman in a lab coat approached us. She introduced herself as Dr. Eris, the lead on the Recalibration program. Are you Finn's cousin? She asked. He listed you as his post-release contact. Yes, what did you do to him? I snapped. She regarded me coolly. Your cousin is one of the first participants in a groundbreaking new procedure that will revolutionize our approach to rehabilitation. We can now facilitate behavioral adjustments, allowing individuals to reintegrate into society. You should be proud. Her tone was condescending. That's not him, I retorted. Finn has never been this vacant. Look at him. Finn hadn't moved from where the guard had left him. He glanced at Dr. Eris and me when he heard his name, but then returned to his blank stare. Please, lower your voice. She looked annoyed. I understand the initial effects may be concerning, but you'll see he's better this way. Remember, your cousin committed a serious offense. This procedure mitigates the risk of future incidents. The effects are irreversible. We need to discuss the reintegration plan. She began marking items on a clipboard, barely listening to me. Looking up, she continued. The procedure is irreversible. Your cousin signed a binding agreement. He's been evaluated by medical professionals and government officials. We're proceeding with Phase 2, Community Reintegration. You have two options. Option 1, you sign this agreement and take your cousin home. You'll contact me daily with updates, and we'll conduct periodic home visits. We'll assist with job placement. You will not disclose details about this process. If asked about his early release or his behavior, you'll state he was released for good behavior and overcrowding. Any violation of these terms will result in his immediate reincarceration and the revocation of your visitation rights. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Option 2, you refuse to sign, in which case your cousin will remain in our custody indefinitely. He will not be eligible for parole and you will have no further contact with him. The choice is yours. And that's the end of recalibration. A bond shattered, a mind forever altered by a procedure that promised redemption but delivered something far more sinister. Finn is back, but he's no longer the person I once knew. Sometimes, the quest for change comes at a far higher price than we're willing to pay. If tonight's story left you uneasy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more tales that linger in the dark. Remember, not all transformations are for the better. This is the Midnight Narrator, and we'll be waiting in the silence of your thoughts.